Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So as is the tradition on these lunar nights, so this morning the bhikkhus and the Cittaviveka, the novices, took their precepts, and again here now this evening people staying in the monastery took their precepts. So it's something we do in our tradition to renew our aspirations towards skillful living, you could say, and skillful use of our body and speech. And precepts are more about guiding our actions of body and speech in skillful ways, in ways that don't lead to harm for oneself and others. And this is the basis of the way of life recommended by the Buddha, because our actions of body and speech bear results, and in terms of when we talk about karma, that the results of unskillfulness in body and speech is going to result in sort of a quality of heart and mind that is not going to be peaceful, and a quality that won't give rise to any like deeper understanding or insight. So, in our Buddhist terminology, it stirs up the hindrances, things that hinder clear seeing. And what I'd like to focus a little bit on tonight is the Buddha's teachings around right speech. Because, speech is, can be a source of great benefit for oneself and others, but also it can be a source of great suffering for oneself and others. So, important to reflect on what is skillful speech. Also, we've in the monastic calendar we've just emerged from 3 months of being more quiet, and now we're more interacting and talking. So it's good for us to reflect on the Buddha's teachings around how to guide our speech. And it's something we have to refine. We come into practice with maybe some not so skillful speech habits, but the practice is to bring more awareness to these and steer away from them as best we can. So this is the practice of living more with a more awareness of how things affect. And just like on one occasion, the Buddhist was talking with his son Rahula, and he asked Rahula, "What is a metaphor?" And Rahula said, it's to see your reflection. And in the same way the Buddha said, this teaching is about, reflecting. And reflecting in a way that, one thing with speech. Before you say something, just to consider, is the results of saying this going to be of harm or benefit to oneself or others? Just that moment to reflect. And then the Buddha said, well, if you're actually in a conversation and it's giving rise to something unskillful for oneself or others, then he recommended maybe, stop the conversation. Or after we've had the conversation, if we reflect that wasn't so skillful, it wasn't so a good result for oneself and others, then maybe we make that sort of determination to be more careful next time. So it's a gradual sort of training, isn't it? From first of all just noticing after, then noticing as we become more aware, noticing as it's happening, as we're more aware, being aware before it happens. So this is how we develop the practice of mindfulness in this way. Now, when we're taking the precepts this evening, there was, in terms of speech, we take the precept to refrain from lying. But there are actually other recommendations. Lying is probably the most heavy karma in terms of use of speech. But there are other aspects of speech that the Buddha encourages us to try and steer away from. And the first one of these is backbiting. Talking about things behind people's backs, stirring things up, trying to turn people against people, knock people down. So, it can happen in life. Somebody's upset us in some way, we have some ill will towards somebody. Or, somebody seems to be having a better deal than us, more popular, more praise, more wealth, or whatever. And, jealousy and ill will can, we can steer our thoughts, and the way we speak towards talking about those people in quite negative ways. But the karma of that is that it keeps this sort of negativity going in our mind. So sometimes there can be a sort of, get it off our chest, as we say, relief when we have a good backbiting session about somebody and we feel, But maybe this is the relief, the moment of relief when we're scratching something and then we stop scratching. And for a moment, there's no itchiness there. But it comes back, doesn't it? And maybe it comes back even more itchy. So these are natural things that we experience, ill will and jealousies, but through awareness, noticing these things and making it, our best not to speak on them, not get into a backbiting session, talking negatively about somebody. So this is, I mean, you see this in the media a lot, don't we? The politicians trying to knock each other down to get votes. I mean, they even go into sort of now the things the family does, you know, not just them, but the families now have to try and knock down their reputation, or their son does this, or the relative does this. Sort of trying to knock, you know, knock them down. It's about turning people against people, isn't it? Trying to ruin their popularity and again, to wanting something they've got, or through jealousy or whatever. I remember, you know, just in my working life, I worked as an engineer in an office, and you know, when I first started to work, I wasn't into Buddhism or Buddhist practice, but yeah, people would come into the office and have a good, you know, talking negatively about somebody. Of course, if you didn't like him yourself, you'd join in. So that was the way it was for a while. But then, with more awareness and you know, the Buddha's teachings, actually noticing after it was over, I mean, I didn't actually feel relief. I just felt quite not very good, actually. So I decided to sort of not get into that way of talking. You know, people would still come in the office and still, you know, backbite about somebody, but I just listen. Sometimes, you know, if I felt appropriate, I might say something positive about the person, just to put them off a bit, you know. And but eventually, you know, sometimes you say, well, I've got to get back to work now. I've got this project to finish. So there's a way of, you know, getting into that way of talking that doesn't, in a sort of more skillful way. So in our monastic tradition, we have a lot of precepts, 227. And they're more refined because they are talking about some of these sort of situations with speech. So, you know, it can happen amongst monks and nuns that, you know, somebody's very popular and you feel a bit jealous because they get all the, you know, all the sort of praise and admiration from people. So, you know, just in this situation, a lay person comes up to a monk and says, "Oh, isn't this monk so wonderful?" You know, and that monk's jealous. He says, "Well, you know, he does some really unskillful things. You know, he's done inappropriate things. You know, with his lust, following his lust." So it is, you know. So to prevent that, the Buddha laid down a rule that, you know, that monks mustn't disclose the gross faults of the monks to lay people. Just keep it in the Sangha. Just because, you know, the tendency can be, if one's, you know, got some ill will to another person or jealousy, that, you know, it could come out like that. Trying to knock them down and talk about their gross faults to lay people. So this is one of our monastic precepts. But Buddha also talked about the speech of this word sapurisa. Sapurisa means, it can be like a superior person, but probably more developed in terms of spiritual. So maybe we could say somebody is more developed in mindfulness and wisdom. So the speech of a sapurisa, if they're asked to talk about somebody's faults, they're very reluctant to talk about them. And even if they're really pushed to, they might say something, but in very little detail. But if they're asked about somebody's good qualities, then they're very happy to elaborate and in more detail. If they're asked about their own good qualities, then if pushed, they might mention something in small detail. If they're asked about somebody else's good qualities, then they're very happy to go into more detail about and talk about that. So it's the opposite of, like somebody who's out to defame. It's a way of speaking that doesn't defame somebody and actually uplifts somebody's credibility where it's appropriate. So this is what can happen, and maybe we see it happening around us, but how not to get caught into it ourselves, which maybe in our own sort of hearts and minds won't give a good result. So there's backbiting, and then there's harsh speech. Sometimes things happen in life and brings up a strong reaction, and we see somebody doing something inappropriate, or some situation, and there's a strong reaction, and we end up shouting at somebody. So this can happen, or telling some people off in very sort of harsh ways. And even things like, you might say, righteous anger. Maybe we're being righteous, and we do see somebody doing wrong, and we get angry at them because of that. But if we speak in harsh ways, that often doesn't bring a good result in terms of what we say, and it doesn't leave us feeling peaceful in any way, does it? Just stirs up the mind. So again, as we develop in the practice, noticing, again the theme is like noticing reactions, but not, say, acting or speaking on them is a way to not keep these habits going, or these habitual reactions going. So, these things will arise, but how can we, to the practice is to be aware of these things in a way that they don't manifest in terms of some action of body and speech. And then this is not creating more karma, and it's not creating results that will lead to more unskillfulness of mind and strengthen these habits. So, in Buddhism, we're not being idealistic about how the mind should react. There's no, I shouldn't react like this, I shouldn't react like that, but it's knowing the way we do react, but can we just be, the practice of being aware of that and not acting and speaking on it. And then this is a way it doesn't create more karma in that respect. Gross karma. Of course, we have meditation about just in terms of the way mentally we can hold on to things and certain habits of mind. So, what the Buddha recommend, if we have to, if we see something inappropriate, if we have a strong reaction, maybe just not just responding straight away to that situation. If we can come back to it when we're a bit more calmer and more clear in the mind about how to respond to it. So, like in monastic life, sometimes people have quite high ideals sometimes, and if they see something, if you get too attached to these high ideals and we see somebody not living up to them, we can get quite angry. So this is also something to be aware of, I think if we can take time just to calm down a bit, then maybe if we have to give some feedback, we can do it in a more skillful way, rather than just blurting it out in a harsh way. So the Buddha, before giving feedback, recommended, for the monastics to, consider certain things, time and place to give the feedback, how to do it in a more sort of, not a high, more of a sort of friendly voice. Think about how you're going to give that feedback. That is going to be probably more in a way that the person might listen to it, considering how to give the feedback. And, considering doing this for the welfare of that other person, rather than trying to get at them or hit back at them or cause suffering for them, but really just to help them to be aware of certain things that are not appropriate. So, time and place, and this way maybe a better result can come from it. The person is more willing to listen, and it can help the person. It seems a high standard, maybe in the monastic Buddha's teaching, but actually I was visiting Manchester Grammar School on an occasion. I happened to look on the notice board, and they had this notice about speech, and it was called Think. And it said, think before you speak, right? And think, it started for, T stood for truthfulness, H was for, these are the things to consider before speaking. Is it truthful? H for, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? And K, is it kind? That was on a school notice board. That's quite a high standard, isn't it? Think before you... I quite like the word encouragement instead of inspiration. Not to always inspire people, but we can encourage. But I thought that was, a nice thing on the board. I mean, I don't know what it's like in society. I mean, I live in a monastery, but just several years ago, my father used to like Emmerdale Farm. It's one of these soaps, and so every summer I'd bring him here to the monastery for a few days, and I'd take him over to my sister's after that. And he'd missed out a few episodes of Emmerdale Farm. And my sister recorded them for him. So I had to sit through 3 episodes of Emmerdale Farm. And my perception, there were just people shouting at each other. It just seemed to be just people yelling at each other for the... But I thought, this is not real life, I hope. Just the soaps and something to get people interested in it. But yes, it's quite... a lot of shouting at each other. It's something to investigate for ourselves when we seeing the results of how we do speak and the way we do speak. And again, meditation is good, just to, when we sit and meditate at the end of the day, we can see the results of maybe things we've said and how we said it. And the third other quality besides lying is about frivolous, and speech is not really so useful. It tends to just excite or stimulate in some way or bring up certain unwholesome mind states, you could say. So this is, like you see in the media, who's having affairs with who and what the people in the media are doing, and the scandals, the quarrels, and all this sort of talking about these sort of things about what famous people are doing. Mostly about not so skillful things doing. So this sort of talk just sort of it stimulates the mind in a very sort of wholesome way. And the different subjects we can get politics and other things can be if it stirs us up and gets us all agitated or righteous, then we're being careful with how we talk around politics. Another thing is like religious views about religion. And, the Buddha encouraged, like, for his, monastic community not to, what he called him to get into verbal warfare. You got it wrong, I'm right, and getting into all sorts of arguments over views about things. Like they're stabbing each other with the weapon of the tongue. So these sort of, ways of speaking are ways that just create, agitation of mind. And the Buddha more recommended keep it, if it's going off track, bring it back to the Four Noble Truths. Are we suffering? Why are we suffering? So maybe there are certain subjects that we talk about, stir us up in skillful ways, so just to be aware of that. Another thing is like conspiracy theories, a lot of speculation, a lot of ideas, people get stirred up, but, is it really of benefit for our quality of mind? So just a lot of speculation and ideas that just stir us up, maybe make us more fearful or whatever, paranoid. So, as the Buddha said, better than 1,000 useless words is the one word that brings peace to yourself or other people. So words that can more help people to calm, settle, brings more wholesome state of mind. So there's the sort of things, that the Buddha encouraged for the monastics is talking about contentment, modesty, encouraging, our time to be more in seclusion, encouraging virtue, and cultivation of the heart and mind through meditation. So, encouraging things that have a more peaceful effect on the quality of mind, wholesome effect. So it's something in the, my youth, was in the north of England, working class north of England, sitting round in the pub night after night, talking about a lot of useless things. So I had a few habits to sort of bring more awareness to in monastic life, but I work with it. So these are the sort of speech that the Buddha said is not, doesn't have a beneficial result, and as best we can to steer away from it. If we want to really develop the mind and meditation onto a deeper level, in terms of lying, backbiting, harsh speech, and frivolous speech that just tends to stimulate, agitate, or doesn't bring up more wholesome states of mind. And this is all part of the Buddhist development, having this foundation in virtue, in actions of body and speech, and then that really gives us a foundation for a meditative life, that we're not creating so much stuff in the mind that's going to make meditation just something that doesn't bring any sort of well-being. But with a foundation in virtue, then this is going to be conducive towards having a more peaceful and clear quality of heart and mind that can see more clearly and lead to more insight. So every 2 weeks we remember our precepts, and if any of those precepts were looking a bit shoddy, we try to make the determination to be more careful for the next couple of weeks, and we carry on like that, trying to refine our actions of body and speech and mind. So I think I'll just offer those reflections this evening.